Chicago, 1971. A blues club on the South Side, the kind of place where smoke hung in the air like unfinished sentences and the stage lights barely cut through the darkness. Curtis Mayfield sat at a corner table, nursing a drink he hadn't touched in an hour. He was 29 years old and had already changed music twice, first with the Impressions, then as a solo artist. People Get Ready in 1965 were a winner in 1967. Songs that didn't ask permission to speak truth. Songs that made civil rights movement anthems without sounding like protest music. Curtis had done something that seemed impossible at the time. He had taken the pain of being black in America and turned it into melodies that white radio couldn't ignore and black listeners couldn't forget. He had pioneered conscious soul music before anyone called it that. He was the first, and he knew it. That night, he was waiting for Marvin Gaye. Marvin arrived late. He walked through the back entrance wearing dark sunglasses, even though it was past midnight. His movements were careful, measured, like someone who had learned to navigate rooms without making noise. He spotted Curtis and made his way to the table. No handshake, no smile, just a nod. "You came," Curtis said. "You asked," Marvin replied. There was history between them, not the kind anyone talked about. They had crossed paths at industry events, polite conversations, professional respect. But underneath there was tension. Two men who had both tried to do the same impossible thing, make popular music that told uncomfortable truths, and had succeeded in completely different ways. Curtis had done it outside the system. He had left the Impressions, started Curtis Records, and built his career on independence. No executives telling him what to say, no compromises. He owned his masters, controlled his message, and paid the price in commercial reach. His music was respected, but it lived on the margins. Marvin had done it inside the system. Motown, Berry Gordy's empire, the most successful black-owned label in history and also the most controlling. For years, Marvin had been the romantic crooner, singing love songs that made white audiences comfortable and black audiences proud. But in 1971, he had released What's Going On, and everything had changed. The album was a miracle of timing and compromise. It was political without being preachy. It was smooth enough for pop radio, but real enough to matter. It had somehow threaded the needle that Curtis had always refused to thread, speaking truth while staying inside the machine. And that was the problem. "I listened to your album," Curtis said, his voice flat, offering nothing. Marvin removed his sunglasses slowly, folding them with precision before setting them on the table. "And," Curtis leaned back in his chair, "it's beautiful, Marvin, really. The production is perfect. Your voice is incredible. The songs are important." Marvin waited. He knew there was more. "But you're still in Motown's house," Curtis continued. "You're still playing by Barry's rules. You think What's Going On is protest music, but it's Motown protest music. Polished, safe, palatable." Marvin's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. He had heard variations of this criticism before, from people who thought real revolutionary art had to be rough, uncompromising, inaccessible. People who believed that if white audiences like something, it must be watered down. "I've been doing this since 1965, Curtis said, and there was something in his voice now. Not anger exactly, but a weight. "People Get Ready. We're a winner. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't soften the message. I built my own label so nobody could tell me what to say or how to say it. That's real protest music, Marvin. What you're doing is beautiful, but it's still inside their system. And the system always wins." The club around them continued its low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. But at their table, the silence was thick. Marvin looked at Curtis for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood up. "Come with me," Marvin said quietly. Curtis hesitated, then followed. They walked through the club to the backstage area, where an old upright piano sat against the wall, covered in scratches and cigarette burns. Marvin sat down at the bench, his fingers hovering over the keys. "You're right about some things," Marvin said, not looking at Curtis. "I am inside the system. I am at Motown. Berry Gordy did fight me on this album. He called it uncommercial. He said it was too political. He didn't want to release it." Curtis crossed his arms, listening. "But I'm still at Motown. Marvin continued. And What's Going On still came out, and it's #1 on the charts, and millions of people who would never listen to Curtis records are hearing these songs. So tell me, Curtis, who's really winning? Before Curtis could answer, Marvin's fingers found the keys. He started playing the opening chords to People Get Ready, Curtis's 1965 masterpiece. The gospel-influenced melody filled the small backstage room, and Marvin began to sing. His voice wrapped around the lyrics with a tenderness that somehow made them even more powerful. He sang about trains and tickets and faith, about getting ready for a journey that didn't require baggage because all you needed was love and belief. Curtis stood completely still. Hearing his own song in Marvin's voice was strange, like seeing your reflection in unfamiliar glass. Marvin wasn't trying to imitate Curtis's delivery. He was offering his own interpretation, smooth and layered with Motown's signature polish. But the message was still there, uncompromised, clear as daylight. When the song ended, Marvin didn't pause. He transitioned immediately into What's Going On, his own title track. But this time he stripped away all the production. No strings, no overdubs, no multi-track vocals. Just his voice and the piano, raw and exposed. The question in the lyrics, what's going on, became more urgent in this sparse arrangement, more personal, more desperate. Curtis felt something shift in his chest. He had spent years believing that protest music had to sound a certain way, rough and unpolished, confrontational and inaccessible to maintain its integrity. But here was Marvin, proving that you could whisper truth and the world would still lean in to listen, that you could work inside the system and still bend it to your will. Marvin finished the song and looked up at Curtis. You pioneered this, I know that. You were first. But being first doesn't mean you own the only path. Curtis sat down on a dusty amp case, his defenses beginning to crack. I spent 6 years building something outside the industry, he said quietly. I thought that was the only way to stay honest, to keep control. And you were right to do it, Marvin said. For you. But I needed to prove something else. I needed to show that we could infiltrate the mainstream, that we could make them play our music, our message, on their radio stations, that we could use their system against them. There was a long silence. Then Curtis spoke, and his voice was different now, softer, stripped of its earlier certainty. Play something else. Marvin thought for a moment, then began, Mercy, Mercy Me, the environmental anthem from What's Going On. The song addressed pollution, dying oceans, and poisoned air, topics that even Curtis, with all his social consciousness, hadn't touched in his music. As Marvin sang about oil wasted on the ocean and fish full of mercury, Curtis realized something that made his throat tighten. Marvin had gone further, not because he was braver or more talented, but because he had reached more people. What's Going On had entered the mainstream conversation in a way that Curtis's releases never could. It was being played in black homes and white homes, in cars and on transistor radios, in places where Curtis's music was considered too difficult, too real, too uncomfortable. And that reach meant something. It meant children who would never seek out independent labels were hearing these questions. It meant housewives and factory workers and teenagers were absorbing messages about war and poverty and environmental destruction without even realizing they were being radicalized by a Motown record. When Marvin finished, Curtis stood up slowly. His eyes were wet, though he tried to hide it by looking away. I thought I was protecting something, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. By staying independent, by staying outside, I thought that was the only honest way. It is honest, Marvin said, but it's not the only honest way. Curtis walked to the piano and placed his hand on its scarred surface. You know what kills me? He said. I've been doing this since 1965. 7 years of trying to wake people up through music. And you do one album and reach 10 times as many people. Because you built the road, Marvin said. I just drove on it with a faster car. The words hung in the air between them. Curtis turned to face Marvin fully, and something in his expression had broken open. I was jealous, he admitted, of what's going on, of your success. I told myself it was about principles, about artistic integrity. But really, I was jealous that you found a way to do what I've been trying to do, and you did it better. Marvin shook his head. Not better, different. You used a megaphone, I whispered. You shouted in the streets. I sang in studios. We're both right. We're both necessary. Curtis sat down next to Marvin on the piano bench, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The club outside continued its rhythm, oblivious to what was happening in this small backstage room. Finally, Curtis said, "Play, people get ready again. But this time, play it your way. The Motown way." Marvin smiled slightly, the first real smile of the night, and began to play. This time he imagined the full production: strings, horns, background vocals, all the elements that Motown did better than anyone. As he played and sang, Curtis could hear it, could imagine what his song would sound like with that level of polish and resources. And for the first time, he didn't resent it. He understood it. When the song ended, Curtis wiped his eyes openly, no longer trying to hide the tears. "I thought I was alone in there," he said. "All these years trying to put consciousness into soul music, I thought I was fighting the battle by myself." "You were never alone," Marvin said quietly. "I was listening, learning, trying to find my own way to do what you were doing." Curtis stood up, and this time when he extended his hand, Marvin took it. They shook, but then Curtis pulled Marvin into an embrace. It was brief, awkward in the way men of their generation often were, with physical affection, but it was real. "I'm sorry I doubted you," Curtis said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say thank you," Marvin replied. They separated, and Curtis headed toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. "Hey, Marvin? Yeah? Your way worked. What's going on is everywhere, and that matters more than I wanted to admit." Marvin nodded slowly. "And your way mattered first. Without people get ready, there's no what's going on. We're not competition, we're continuation." Curtis smiled, a real smile this time, and walked out into the Chicago night. Marvin sat alone at the piano for a while longer, playing fragments of songs, Curtis's and his own, letting them blend together until he couldn't remember which was which. That night changed something in both of them. Curtis went back to Curtom Records with renewed purpose, understanding that his path, while different from Marvin's, was equally valid and equally necessary. His 1972 album Superfly would prove that independent labels could create mainstream impact without compromising message. And Marvin returned to Motown with a deeper appreciation for what he had accomplished. What's going on wasn't a betrayal of protest music. It was an evolution of it, a proof that consciousness could be accessible, that revolution could be beautiful, and that working inside the system didn't always mean surrendering to it. Years later, when Curtis was asked about that night in Chicago, he would pause before answering, choosing his words carefully. "I thought protest music had to be one thing. Marvin showed me it could be everything. He didn't replace what I was doing. He amplified it, and I needed to see that. Two pioneers, two paths, both right, both necessary, both forever changed by a midnight conversation in a blues club where ego gave way to understanding and competition gave way to respect." The light was still on in the club when Marvin finally left, and the piano sat silent, holding the memory of voices that had asked the same question in different ways. What's going on? And in that moment, both men had found not an answer, but something better. They found each other.